In 713 AD, an emperor vanished, not from the throne, not from life, from history itself. His face was chiseled off every mosaic in Constantinople. His name was scraped from every administrative document in the empire. His coinage was recalled, melted, and reminted with a different face. And the men who did this were not rebels, not enemies. They were government employees. They had an office. They had a budget. They had a title. And here is what nobody ever told you. That office had been running for over 200 years before this moment, and the story of how it worked and what happened when someone tried to shut it down has never been told. What history remembers is this. Byzantium was the eastern continuation of Rome. It lasted 1,000 years. Emperors rose and fell. Some were brilliant, some were monsters. History kept score. What history forgot to mention is this. Byzantium did not just remove bad emperors, it removed the evidence that they had ever existed. There was a word for it, damnatio memoriae, condemnation of memory. The Romans practiced it, but Rome's version was disorganized, symbolic, a gesture. The Byzantines turned it into an institution. They built a department, staffed it, funded it through the imperial treasury, gave it jurisdiction over every archive in the empire, from Constantinople to the furthest provincial outpost in Anatolia. The department had a name. The Silentiaries. Officially, they were palace ushers, enforcers of silence in the imperial presence chamber. Men whose job was to ensure no authorized voice reached the emperor. But here is what they didn't tell you. The Silentiaries had a second function, undocumented in any official capacity, but forensically reconstructed from what survives. They were the mechanism by which inconvenient emperors ceased to exist in the written record. And the man who built them into what they became had his own nose cut off first. We will get to him. But first, you need to understand what the machine actually did. To understand the Silentiaries, you need to understand the Byzantine relationship with legitimacy. Rome had the Senate. Rome had the legions. Power in Rome was a negotiation between institutions. Byzantium had one institution, the emperor. Every law, every tax, every military command, every appointment of every bishop in every city, all of it flowed from one man sitting on one throne in one room in Constantinople. Which meant that when that man was removed, and in Byzantium emperors were removed constantly, by coup, by assassination, by palace revolt, the entire administrative machinery of the empire had to instantly transfer its allegiance to a different man. And that transfer only worked if the previous man had never existed. This is not metaphor. This is administrative necessity. Every document in the empire referenced imperial authority by name. Every law began with the emperor's name. Every land grant, every military commission, every tax record. If a condemned emperor's name remained in those documents, it created a legal problem. Citizens could cite his laws. Soldiers could claim their commissions came from his authority. Regional governors could argue their appointments predated the new regime. The erasure was not theatre. It was legal infrastructure maintenance,
And this is where Justinian II enters the story. Justinian II was emperor twice. The first reign ended when his enemies cut off his nose and exiled him to Crimea. In the Byzantine system, physical mutilation disqualified a man from the throne. No disfigured man could be emperor. It was considered a sign of divine disfavor. So they cut off his nose and assumed the problem was solved. They were wrong.
Justinian spent 10 years in exile. He built alliances with the Bulgars and the Khazar Khanate. He returned to Constantinople in 705 AD with a foreign army, and he took back his throne. And then he did something that changed the Byzantine erasure apparatus forever. He commissioned a golden prosthetic nose, and he wore it publicly. He was not hiding the mutilation. He was displaying it, daring anyone to cite the disqualification rule to his face.
And then he turned the Silentiaries from a palace protocol office into a systematic retrospective revision department. He had personal motivation. The men who had erased his first reign from the record were still alive. He knew exactly how the machine worked, because it had been used on him. So he rebuilt it, expanded it, gave it reach into provincial archives it had never touched before. He created the correction team protocol, scribal units dispatched from Constantinople to physically alter documents in regional archives, redate records, remove names, insert replacement references. And he used it first on his enemies. Every man who had authorized his mutilation, every administrator who had served the intervening emperors. But here is what they didn't tell you. In expanding the machine to destroy his enemies, Justinian II created something too powerful for any single emperor to control. 8 years after his second reign began, the machine was used on him. Justinian II was overthrown in 711 AD, executed, and then erased by the very apparatus he had perfected. The erasure of Justinian II took 14 months. This is the forensic record, and it is the most detailed account we have of how the mechanism actually functioned. The new emperor was Philippicus Bardanus, a general, a usurper, a man who had watched Justinian's expanded Silentiaries apparatus function for 8 years and understood immediately what it could do for him.
The first order went out within 72 hours of Justinian's execution. Coinage recall. Every solidus, every follis, every bronze numus bearing Justinian's face was to be surrendered to imperial mints for reminting. Provincial governors were given 90 days to comply. Non-compliance was treason. This was not a symbolic gesture. The Byzantine monetary system circulated approximately 40 million coins across the empire at any given time. The logistics of recalling even a fraction of them required a dedicated administrative operation running continuously for over a year. But here is what they didn't tell you. The coinage recall was not primarily about removing Justinian's face from circulation. It was about the inscriptions. Every Byzantine coin carried not just the emperor's image, but a legitimizing text, a formula connecting the emperor's authority to divine sanctioned. That text, still in circulation, was a daily reminder to every merchant, soldier, and farmer in the empire that Justinian II had once been the divinely sanctioned ruler. The new regime needed that reminder gone. Simultaneously, the mosaic correction teams were activated. Constantinople alone contained over 300 imperial portrait mosaics in churches, in administrative buildings, in the hippodrome, in the Great Palace complex itself. Each one showed Justinian II's face. The Silentiaries coordinated teams of craftsmen, not artists, craftsmen, men who worked fast and did not ask questions, to re-chisel portrait faces, replace them with generic imperial features, or with Philippicus's own likeness where politically necessary. The process took 7 months in Constantinople alone. But Constantinople was only the beginning. The correction orders went out to the themes, the administrative provinces of the Byzantine Empire, Anatolia, the Balkans, southern Italy, North Africa.
Each theme had its own archive, its own collection of imperial documents, its own portrait mosaics in its own churches and administrative buildings. The provincial correction teams were smaller. They worked with less oversight, and the documentary record of their work, when it survives at all, reveals something deeply disturbing. They were not just erasing Justinian. They were erasing anyone Justinian had elevated, any administrator whose commission document bore his name, any bishop whose appointment letter cited his authority, any military commander whose rank traced back to his reign. The erasure metastasized. The document alteration protocol worked as follows. A correction team of 3 to 5 scribes arrived at a provincial archive with a sealed order from the Silentiaries office in Constantinople. The archive's keeper had no authority to refuse. Refusal was treason. The team worked through the archive systematically.
Every document referencing Justinian II by name was either physically destroyed, scraped clean and overwritten, or annotated with a marginal correction redirecting the legal authority to the new emperor retroactively. The scraping process used pumice stone on vellum, iron blades on papyrus. The correction was visible to anyone who examined the document closely, which is precisely why the documents were then recopied, the scraped original destroyed, a clean copy produced, the clean copy filed as the primary record. This is the moment that defies logic. The Byzantines were not trying to create a perfect forgery. They knew the erasure had happened. The people doing it knew. The archive keepers knew. The provincial governors knew. But the system operated on a principle that no competitor in the space has ever identified. Official silence creates official reality. It did not matter that everyone in a provincial archive knew the documents had been altered. What mattered was that no official record acknowledged the alteration. The altered document became the legal document. The legal document became history. And anyone who cited the original, anyone who produced an unaltered document as evidence of anything, was producing evidence of a condemned emperor's authority, which was treason. But here is what they didn't tell you. Philippicus Bardanus, the man who activated this entire apparatus against Justinian II, reigned for exactly 18 months. In June of 713 AD, he was overthrown in a palace coup, blinded, deposed. And the Silentiaries apparatus he had used so effectively against his predecessor was immediately turned on him. His coinage recalled, his mosaics re-chiseled, his documents scraped. The machine did not care who built it. It did not care who ran it. It cared only that someone was running it.
And the new emperor, Anastasius II, understood something that Justinian and Philippicus had both missed. The apparatus was not a weapon. It was an organism. It had developed institutional momentum. It had staff who depended on it for their livelihoods. It had protocols that self-perpetuated. It had a budget line in the imperial treasury that had been renewed so many times it had become permanent. Anastasius II tried to reduce it. He lasted 2 years. Here is the moment that broke every historian who found it. In 899 AD, nearly 2 centuries after Philippicus Bardanus was erased, a Byzantine court official named Philotheos compiled a document called the Kletorologion. It was an administrative handbook.
A seating plan for imperial banquets. A rank ordering of every office in the Byzantine government. And buried in it, between the master of the imperial wardrobe and the keeper of the imperial inkwell, was the Silentiaries. Still listed, still funded, still staffed. 200 years after the men who built the modern version of the apparatus had themselves been erased by it. The office that deleted emperors had outlasted every emperor it had ever deleted. Philotheos listed their duties with the same flat administrative language he used for everyone else. They were palace ushers, enforcers of silence, nothing more. No reference to the correction teams, no reference to the coinage recalls, no reference to the mosaic defacement protocols, no reference to the document scraping operations, because those functions had been erased from the office's own records. The apparatus had erased its own operational history. The mechanism of erasure was so effective, so deeply embedded in Byzantine institutional culture, that it had eventually been applied to itself. The Silentiaries survived as an office precisely because their most dangerous function had been removed from their official description. They became invisible by becoming boring. And then the forensic record delivers one more detail. One single detail that has never appeared in any YouTube video, any documentary, any popular history account of Byzantium. In 1204 AD, when the Fourth Crusade sacked Constantinople, the Crusaders broke into the imperial archive. They found room after room of manuscript storage, centuries of imperial records, and they burned most of it. Not for ideology, not for religion, for warmth. The sack happened in April. The nights were cold. The manuscripts were dry. But one crusader, a French knight named Robert de Clary, wrote an account of what he saw before the burning. He described, with the bafflement of a man who did not understand what he was looking at, rooms full of documents where the writing appeared to have been washed or scraped and rewritten. Rooms where the same documents existed in multiple versions, each slightly different from the last. He did not know what he was seeing. He was seeing the archive of the erasure apparatus. Centuries of corrected documents, scraped vellum, overwritten papyrus, the physical residue of every emperor who had ever been officially unmade. And he burned it for warmth. The final erasure was performed not by the Silentiaries, not by a new emperor, not by the Byzantine bureaucratic machine. It was performed by a French knight who was cold. Why does a system like this get built? The easy answer is power. Emperors erase rivals because emperors fear rivals. But the forensic psychology
tells a more disturbing story. The Silentiaries' apparatus was not primarily driven by the emperors who used it. It was driven by the administrative class that staffed it. Every correction team scribe, every archive keeper who received the sealed orders, every craftsman who re-chiseled a mosaic face, every mint official who oversaw a coinage recall. These were not ideologues. They were not true believers. They were bureaucrats. And modern psychology has a precise term for what they were doing: moral disengagement through procedural compliance. Stanley Milgram demonstrated it in 1961. When authority structures frame an action as a procedure rather than a moral choice, when the harm is distributed across enough individual steps that no single actor feels responsible for the outcome, ordinary people will do extraordinary things without experiencing the psychological cost of having chosen to. The Byzantine correction team scribe was not erasing an emperor. He was following a correction protocol.
He was maintaining archive accuracy. He was complying with a sealed imperial order. Each step had its own procedural justification. Each individual actor was insulated from the full moral weight of the aggregate action. This is not ancient history. Every modern institutional cover-up follows the same architecture. The lawyer who files the motion that buries the evidence did not bury the evidence. The archivist who reclassifies the document did not destroy the information. The communications officer who issues the correction did not write the original. The Byzantines did not invent the architecture of deception. They just built the first documented bureaucratic infrastructure for it. And here is the detail that makes this deeply uncomfortable in a way you cannot stop thinking about.
The Silentiaries' apparatus worked. We only know about Philippicus Bardanis because a single unaltered source, a hostile ecclesiastical chronicle written outside Byzantine administrative control, survived the correction teams. For every Philippicus whose erasure we can partially reconstruct, there are almost certainly emperors we cannot reconstruct. Reigns we have no record of. Men who sat on the throne of the longest surviving Christian empire in history and left no forensic trace because the machine that erased them worked perfectly. We do not know how many emperors were erased so completely that we do not know they were erased. That is the sentence that should disturb you most.
The Silentiaries' office appears in Byzantine records for the last time in 1150 AD. After that, nothing. No disbandment order, no record of the office being closed, no final entry in any administrative document. It simply stops appearing. Which means one of two things. Either the office was finally shut down and the disbandment order did not survive, or the office erased its own final records and continued operating under a different name. The Byzantine administrative system continued for another 300 years after 1150. 300 years of imperial coups, of condemned emperors, of coinage recalls and document corrections and mosaic re-chiselings, and no office officially responsible for any of it. We have never found the replacement. We may never find it. That is either because it did not exist, or because it was very, very good at its job. If what just happened in this video unsettled you, you are not prepared for what the Byzantine empress who forged her own husband's face into the Hagia Sophia did next.
That video is the next. Make sure you subscribe and turn on your notification bell so you don't miss